And welcome to another Pro Audio Suite, thanks to Tribooth. Don't forget the code TRIPAP200. That will get you $200 off your Tribooth and Austrian Audio, making passion heard. Roll intro.
I might not now. I might just leave you hanging there.
Yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
To the Pro Audio Suite.
These guys are professional, they're motivated.
With Tech to the VO stars, George Whittam, founder of Source Elements, Robert Marshall, international audio engineer, Darren Robbo Robertson, and Global Voice, Andrew Peters. Thanks to Tribooth, Austrian Audio, making passion heard, Source Elements, George the Tech Whittam, and Robbo and AP's international demos. To find out more about us, check the ProAudioSuite.com.
Line up, ladies!
Here we go.
And this week we have a special guest, Derek Bargaehr. You may not know the name, but you probably know the microphones.
You should.
They're called
Yeah.
Vanguard. Hello, Derek.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Good,
I don't
good,
have
good.
nearly as sexy of a voice as you do, so you do all the talking, I'll just listen.
No, but you've got the microphone there, so we want to hear it. And they look pretty flash too. But before we get into the microphones, just give us a bit of background. How did you start producing your own product?
Oh, I'll keep it as short as possible. Like most people in the music industry, I think I fell bass backwards into it and just been here ever since, loved music all my life, was, joined a band in junior high with my friends as one does. But also have been a tinkerer all my life, taking apart everything electronic in the house, much to the chagrin of my parents, because not always did I know how to put it back together. That's how you practice, right? So those two things kind of joined when I was in the band. Instead of, getting better at my instrument, the guitarist had these pedals that did cool things. And I was like, oh, I wish I could do that with my bass. So there weren't a lot of bass pedals back then. So I ended up working with just kind of learning how to modify guitar pedals for bass frequencies. And then I went to school for music and I was like, oh, everybody here is better at this than I am. But I got into engineering. And then while I was doing that, I was fixing people's gear and upgrading their gear and modifying their guitars and things of that nature. And had to get an internship to get out of school with a degree and didn't want to scrub toilets at a studio. So I
did that.
Yeah, so did a lot of people in my graduating class, and I'm like, boy, I'm glad I didn't have to be the coffee gopher.
Smartest
at this
thing you do
particular
is
studio.
realize you shouldn't be doing that. And the earlier you do that, the better.
I think that's illegal now, but back in the 90s, that was all the rage to make all the, hey, would you go to college?
Everything's
Good, clean the toilet.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, and let me pee all over it first before you go in
it's
there,
all rock
just for
and
a
roll.
laugh.
That was on a good day, yes.
I think studios have more disgusting bathrooms than gas stations.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Especially depending on their clientele.
Yes.
But I ended up interning at a microphone company called Avant Electronics when Ken Avant owned it. He no longer does. That's a whole other story. And worked there for 4 or 5 years as I don't know. It was a small company. We wore a lot of hats. I don't think I had a title. I just did a lot of stuff.
Janitor.
And janitor, chief cook and bottle washer, all that.
Right.
And so the defecation hit the oscillation at that particular company, and I had to then make a decision. And I was freelancing for a while, doing studio upgrades and installs and fixing people's gear on the side. And then Ken called me as like, hey, I'd still like to start another mic company. Do you want to start it with me? And so we started that. And Ken had, obviously taught me a lot about transducers and how more about the microphone side of things than I was previously aware of. And I've been doing this for 11 or 12 years now and just keep enjoying it for some reason, and it's my way to contribute to music and voiceover and all these other things. Cause I was definitely not a great musician. I didn't want to put in the 16 hours a day of woodshedding to catch up with my peers in college. And I was a good engineer and I had a good ear, but there were a lot of people that did that, and this just sort of stuck with me. It marries the mechanical and the physical and the scientific with the subjective and the artistic and the why do we like the way that things sound, and it's not, that part is actually kind of difficult to quantify and there's argument about it, but it marries those two things in this ever evolving quest of how do I make a tool that makes an artist's job more enjoyable and easier and gives them more creative expression. And as long as I'm looking at mics that way, I'm probably going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Your journey sounds, well, I shouldn't say, but I'm thinking, Robert, you had a similar kind of journey, didn't you, really?
Kind of. I had an early experience where I was in a band and I was interning at a studio in high school, and actually that was by this time I was still at that studio in college, and I forget, I wasn't kicked out of the band, but I wasn't in the band anymore, and I began getting the distinct feeling that I was in bands because I had hookups to get people recorded, and at some point the studio owner is just like, maybe you're a better producer than you are the musician part of it. Like maybe that's your thing, and kind of got me to kind of embrace that more instead of trying to be the lead guitarist or whatever I was thinking I would be. So yeah, a little bit like that.
Did you have long hair, Robert?
I did. In college, I had long hair.
Wow.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
David Lee Roth style, was that?
No, it wasn't frilled up. It was more hippie, like.
Yeah, I was going to say you'd have been a bit
boy.
of a yacht. You'd have looked like a yacht rock kind of dude from the 70s.
Maybe, yeah.
Would just look like a yobbo, I reckon.
Yeah, just a homeless guy. Yeah.
Is the guest allowed to ask a question?
Of course.
Is there a reason why Robert is speaking to us from the great beyond on video?
We didn't want to go there, but
because I'm in heaven. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is it nice?
You don't want it. It's better down here or down where you are. Yeah.
He's at his dealer's house and he doesn't want him giveaways.
That makes sense.
That's all cocaine back there. Yes.
Oh, you're on the set of Blow. Gotcha.
I mean, that's what heaven is.
Excuse me while I sneeze.
Yeah. Thank God there's no wind in heaven. Otherwise,
it's NAMM in the 80s. The cocaine's back.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So Derek, tell us a bit about your first ever mic. I'm interested to know if you look back now, because I look back at my first demo and go, holy crap, how did that ever get me a job? How did that first mic turn out?
It's funny because Ken was very heavily involved in the design process early on because he designed mics at Avantone. I was very lucky in that, imagine if you go to make your first record and, your engineer and producer, you're at Abbey Road and your producer's, Eno or Lanois and your engineer's Steve Genowick or Al Schmidt. Like you're going to have a better time. Right. So Ken was really good at this. And so, actually the V13, it's not the one I'm speaking into right now. I don't have a V13 in my home office at the moment, but it's a tube microphone, a 9-pattern tube microphone. And it has been wildly successful, actually. It's consistently our best seller, and people love it because it punches way above its weight class. They love it because it's versatile. We tried to walk this subjective line between like some mics are the best mic in the world on a particular voice, but only on that voice because they're so heavily voiced and aggressively voiced, which is great. And then some mics, like the AKG 414 will work on everything. And if you record your entire record with that, it's going to sound like vanilla cake with mayonnaise frosting. So there's this line between like flattery and musicality and like a more objective, like we want to capture things as they are, that you have to constantly ride. And like the philosophy of different mic designers will indicate where they ride that line. Right. So, people really like the V13 because it rides that line pretty well. And quite frankly, studios today are in basements and bedrooms and garages or, in business parks. They're not their own massive built out things with 60 mics for a vocal locker. So the mic that you choose to be your main vocal mic, it has to be affordable enough. And then it also has to be versatile enough that you don't need to get 8 other mics that do something. Maybe that can be your main vocal mic. And then you have a couple other ones as backups. And then, but it ended up being great for drum overheads and great on guitar amps and great on acoustic guitars and great in voiceover, apparently, because Scott Rummel was using one for a long time.
So the V13 is, if I'm going to guess, I'm probably wrong here, but I'll guess, is it kind of a C12 style a little bit?
Actually, no. One thing that we're really proud of is that we don't really do clones of anything, and we're not really trying to emulate anything. So, I mean, there's so many people doing that so well.
The reason why I ask is it doesn't look like it has the classic grounding pin in the middle of it, like a Neumann. It looks like it's terminated on the outside, like
it is
C12.
an edge terminated capsule, yes,
Okay.
but it's not actually a CK12 capsule. CK12s from like the AKG C12s, like you talked about, and they were also in the C24, the 414, a couple other of their mics. The original brass ones are legendary for how good they sound, and also legendary for how difficult they are to manufacture. The fact that AKG was able to pump out any in like the 50s and 60s is a miracle because they're so complex. It's this has one chamber between the two backplates. The CK12 had 4 backplates and 3 chambers, and all of those affected the sound, along with this diaphragm spacing, the diaphragm tension, the way it was all drilled together, the way those chambers aligned with each other. It's a nightmare to manufacture to this day, and there's only a few people that do it. So this mic has an actual CK12 style capsule in it. This is more like an edge terminated K67, but we do custom voice it with a different diaphragm spacers, different diaphragm tensioning, things like that, because we want it to sound like our own mic. So
the C12 thing is more about the chambers in there and less about where it's terminated, I guess, possibly.
Yeah, the center termination is a Neumann thing, I would largely argue, because there's really only so many styles of capsule out there, although there are companies coming out with new and interesting capsules like Ireland and Audio-Technica and stuff like that.
My lab has their rectangular ones.
That's right. I forgot about my lab. I should have probably mentioned them because I'm always interested in anybody that's pushing the envelope, right? And Austrian Audio does their own capsule it's ceramic based, which is genius because it gets rid of some of the complications of manufacturing and maintaining condenser capsules.
And it's supposedly a C12. It's a derivative, or what do they call it? The CK12 or something? Right?
Oh, yeah, the CK12.
Yeah.
CKR12, isn't it?
CKR12. Yeah.
Well, if anybody's doing it, it's the guys that were originally at AKG. And I know and like a lot of the guys at Austrian and talk to them on a regular basis at NAMM and stuff. They're good dudes and they're really, really bright fellas. So
supposedly Warm does a 414 brass capsule mic, but
incorrect.
I'll
just leave it there.
Yeah, I was wondering how accurate of a brass. Yeah.
You know what they do is they mark it really well.
They do indeed. Yes, they do. It's funny because Peluso do one. Peluso do the 414, but is theirs the CK12 or is it a different version of it?
According to John, he just actually did a CK12, but before that, it was an edge terminated K67 similar to this. I don't know. I haven't seen the new CK12. So the guys I know that are doing it properly are Ben at Bees Audio. Open Plan Recording does one, and they're also Australian, weirdly, although I don't really know the guys there.
They're not far from me, actually. They're probably about an hour away from where I live.
I use the ones from Ben at Bees Knees.
I was going to ask, do you make your own capsule? Because I know that they distribute a lot of capsules. Like that was kind of what he got into, even more than making his mics. Was I'm in this manufacturer and I'm in that manufacturer.
I imagine once you tool out to make something like a capsule, you want to sell a lot
CNC machines.
Well, you want to sell a lot of freaking capsules, right? At that point, because it's not easy.
Ben is probably the only guy that can mass produce. Like Tim Campbell makes great CK12s, and almost all of them go to Flea because Flea puts them in their microphones. It's hard to get a hold of a Tim Campbell CK12, or for any of his capsules. There's a couple other guys that do it, and their names are escaping me, so I apologize to those fellas, but. I really like Ben's because he can pump them out really quick. He can match them really well because we put them in our high-end stereo mic as well, the V24, and the fronts and the backs, like all 4 diaphragms have to be matched within like 1 or 2 picofarads of each other for it to sound the same, right?
And for it to be a proper like figure 8 that's equal on both sides, and then you can do a boom line properly and all that.
Yeah, before you even get to how you're polarizing it and how you're treating it within the circuit, the capsule has to be constructed really, really well. And even then, it's so easy for them to come out of alignment from various if one screw comes loose, it messes up the whole diaphragm tension because they're not glued to the ring, right? So it's like a drum head. Right. So there are some capsules that, like our capsule, it's actually glued to the ring when it's manufactured so that I could, in theory, take apart the capsule, put it back together in a clean room because you don't want any dust in there whatsoever, and it would still sound the same. Whereas with a CK12, so
yeah.
Wow.
What's the difference? Because I've got a 414 EB.
Yeah. Yes.
It's got a
From
nylon
83.
ring to it.
But
or
it's got the
something.
nylon capsule.
Yeah. Here, hang on. I've got one on my desk because I repair mics for a living, and I can show you.
We might be calling you. I have some. Where are you located?
Actually, Derek might have an inside line on getting some mics fixed for you there, Robert.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
You guys might have to talk offline.
Oh, that's fine. I've got M49 to U67 sitting in a box over here. I've got at any time I've got like 20 or 30 grand worth of vintage mics sitting that aren't working. So this is the one you're talking about. This is a Teflon version, right?
Yeah.
So when AKG was making that original CK12 brass capsule, it was incredibly complicated. Genius design, super difficult to manufacture. They're throwing away about half the capsules they built. It was not sustainable.
More than half, yeah. Wow.
So what they did is they came out with something that was much simpler to manufacture. It does not have the complex backplates. In fact, you can see inside, it's all plastic. And they have a little screen in there as the acoustic resistance in between the two capsules. And then the backplate itself, I don't know if I have a backplate in here. Gotcha. I'll show you right now because I've got this whole thing apart. So
Thing
I
with
don't have a
holes
backplate
in it,
here.
right?
Yes.
Yes.
Here's the diaphragm, right? This is one with a hole in it. Speaking of broken diaphragms, you can see why this one had to come out.
So what happens with that one is that it shorts out with someone's breath because of the hole, right?
Yes, or it shorts out already right against the back of the diaphragm because it's a capacitor, right? So you have to have a charge state between the two of them.
And it just tracks.
Yeah, and if electrons if they have a short over to the other side, then you no longer have a charge state on them. I don't have a backplate in this box, oddly enough. But yeah, backplates, this is the Teflon capsule that has the newer. You can see those holes in the back for the acoustic resistance.
Yeah.
Backplates generally look like that. I wish I had grabbed the right
So I've
box,
seen some of the backplates that have like holes all the way through them, like all over the place.
Yes.
And then some just have, and that's to let the acoustic pressure go through, right? That's the purpose of those holes?
Yes, there's through holes and there's blind holes. Blind hole, and they both serve similar purposes in some way, but blind holes act like dampers. Because if you had no blind holes and this was tuned to 1,000 hertz and somebody sings 1,000 hertz into it, it's going to ring just like a tom, right? Like a floor tom.
Yeah.
So those blind holes, what they do is they are an acoustic damping factor that prevent it from resonating at its frequency. So then across the spectrum, you get, in theory, even sound. Although, because nothing's perfect and there's physics at play, that's why there's so many different capsules that sound so many different ways. They don't all sound like our ears.
So quick ADD moment, but therefore a small diaphragm microphone has a much higher resonant frequency, and that makes it better to tune and flatter across the audible spectrum?
Not necessarily, because it's by tension, right? Part of the reason why they are, there's less mass, so there's less to work with there. And then I did a video on this and I won't get super deep into it, but off-axis response tends to be much better on small diaphragms because of the way that it interprets sound as a pressure microphone. And I did a video on this on Instagram. I'm not going to explain it to you guys because I think if your audience isn't bored to tears yet, I might. Some of them might start.
I can already tell you for now, the 3 hours that we have will not be enough. But that's okay.
Well. So to answer Andrew, right? Andrew, because it just says AP. To answer your original question, they went to the Teflon capsules because they're easier to mass manufacture, but they don't sound nearly as good. Now the EBs were the last ones to use the brass capsules, but not all of them did. That said, I greatly prefer the EB P48, which was the one after it, to the EB circuit-wise. It's a much better circuit, has quieter, it has better output, less self-noise, higher SPLs before distortion. But people like the EBs because they were the last one to use the brass capsule. If you take a bee's knees brass capsule and put it in an EB, which I've done for 3 or 4 clients now, they sound extraordinary. They sound so good. Yeah.
I've got my EB's a P48.
How do you tell the difference between an EB P48 and an EB?
Well, it's black for one. Yeah,
okay,
and
the EB
EB was
P48
silver.
is okay.
Yeah.
So the brass ones are silver, and the P48 is gotcha.
But some of the silver ones had the Teflon capsules too. That's when they changed over. Yeah,
but you can tell a Teflon capsule just by looking straight into it.
I mean, a brass capsule looks like.
Yeah, you see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had one sitting on my desk, but you can see it right through. And you'll see the Teflon one. It looks white like this on the inside. All you got to do is shine a light through the back of it. And if you see I just dropped this one. Not that it matters because
Now it's out of tune.
Very broken. Yeah, I think it had more problems before that. But you can actually see this little like crinkly material that they use for the spacer, because you can actually unscrew this. This is 2 halves, believe it or not. You can see that crinkly material, and you can see that on some of them, on the older ones.
You could probably see it on mine. Can you see
it's
that?
white.
Yeah,
I believe it is. Also, the you'll see screws on the brass, like you see the ring on this. Yeah. They just pressure fit these, so there's no screws on this one, and on this one. And I'm just going to move this one because it's not making sound right now.
So this is a brass capsule CK12.
This is a brass CK12. You can see the screws on them, right?
Yeah.
So that's like a $3,000 mic or something. What is that?
This is a $5,000 microphone.
Jesus. Wow.
This is, and I'm not even talking into it. Here's me talking into it right now. Let me change over. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was turned sideways, so you probably didn't hear me very well at all. This one has 3 voicings on it. So it has a ribbon mode, a C12 mode, and a 251 mode.
Ooh, can we hear the ribbon mode?
Oh, yeah, sure. You're going to hear a pop, so
that's all
we'll
right.
have to fix that in post. Right now,
How
we're
do
in
you make
251.
a condenser mic sound like a ribbon?
A lot of it is just voicing, right? It's selective EQing with different functions within the actual audio circuit. But now we're in ribbon mode, and I've currently got the voltage pushed all the way up, and it's in hypercardioid. So let me throw it in figure 8, so it's actually even more like a ribbon.
Wow. Even over Google Meet, we can really hear the difference.
Oh, I can totally hear the difference over Google Meet.
You have 9 polar. I wish I hadn't taken apart my entire desk right before this because my interface was misbehaving. Oh, and you're hearing me through a Focusrite 2i2. There's nothing special about
So the
preamp I'm
V14
using.
is the C12 one that you're on right now?
Yes, it's the CK12. So this has the polar patterns, and it also has a tube voltage control. So right now I'm overdriving the tube on this microphone. But I can also sag it back, and it's going to sound completely different. You're also going to lose several decibels as I sag it back. Mm-hmm. But let's let it stabilize. And I'm going to punch this up a little bit. And now it's going to sound like a different microphone.
Wow.
Because of the way. Yeah. So I'm gonna punch that back up. I'm gonna dial this back. There we go. Dial it back to a more reasonable level.
It is a split personality microphone.
It is.
It's about as analog modeling microphone as you can get. Is the way I say it.
Wow.
I don't think anybody has that ability. That's the first mic I've heard of it, to sag the voltage or overdrive the voltage right on the microphone itself.
I've got a provisional patent on that because it's going to go in our V13 eventually as well.
Yeah.
Also, so yeah.
Cool.
This is the sort of mad scientist stuff. I mean, you can see this is my little mad scientist desk because the one at the California office is much bigger.
I was going to comment on the background, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I do my mic repairs. I've got a National Panasonic WM730A open on the desk right now. So, which is their version of a Sony C37 FET.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Panasonic made microphones for a while, believe it or not.
That's bizarre. I never knew that.
I did
Let
not
me
know
switch
that
back to the other microphone so you guys can actually hear me.
How do you keep all those numbers in your head? Because I'll be honest with you, me and like mic models and stuff, I'm useless. Seriously, all those numbers and models and stuff.
I think
and
Derek is
specs and all
special.
that just go.
I think if I'm on the spectrum, I wouldn't be terribly surprised. But also, like, you like what you focus on, right? Like, if you're into fantasy football, you can name like the 3rd string quarterback for every team in the NFL.
Right. Yeah.
Any concert, I can name all the mics on the drum set and everything.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that's a
I know.
MD421.
Yeah.
It's just how I roll, and it's what I'm into. So
I guess my brother's an airline pilot, so I suppose it's similar. It's the same sort of thing.
It's just human brain's a powerful thing. You just have to focus its attention on things.
Yeah. Now, talking of diaphragms, what about the M7? I have an M7 capsule.
Let's talk about protected sex. Oh, sorry. Talking about diaphragms. Yeah.
And with Mylar or the non-Mylar.
Yeah, I think Rob
So the
needs to drop out of
M7
that conversation. Anyway, go
It's
ahead.
kind of the
Careful or I'll look
precursor.
at you.
Right.
The most fertile in the group.
Yeah. Who said that men can't get pregnant?
Anyway.
So the M7 was the predecessor in many ways to the K47, which is in the U47.
Yeah.
In fact, and somebody's going to correct me on this. My Neumann history isn't good, so if I'm wrong, somebody in the comments will undoubtedly tell me.
I'll correct you then.
I feel like some of the U47s actually had M7s in them
They did.
initially.
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Now the M7 was even more difficult to manufacture in some ways than the CK12 because of the way the diaphragm was glued on, and also they were using polyvinyl chlorate. They were using PVC for the diaphragm.
That's the thing. It would disintegrate, right?
It would disintegrate. That's correct. In fact, I wish I had it available. I have an M7 here right now that looks like it's been hit by a gun. An M7 capsule that's just completely exploded. It looks like the alien baby from the movie came out of it. Yeah. I don't know what somebody did to it, but it's getting reskinned. Not by me. I drink too much coffee for reskins, although I'm eventually going to learn. I promised myself. I just haven't done it yet. So I'm going to send it down to Dave Wheeler at Heiserman, who does reskins for me. And Dave Perlman in LA also does them. There's Thiersch in Europe that does them. But the M7 has a very similar whole backplate design to the K47. It's actually a single backplate, whereas with the K67 they actually do two backplates because it's easier to match the two rears or the two sides of it.
I thought that was because of the voltage increase on the tube mic compared to the U87 that needed a lower voltage.
No, actually the K47 and the K67 can handle similar polarization voltages before collapse, I think. It's more to do with ease of manufacturing. So the K40
does that difference in space cause an issue in figure 8 with phase?
No,
it doesn't.
Nope. I mean, I'm in figure 8 on this other mic right here, so let me turn it back up real quick. And this is two backplates. A CK12 style capsule has two backplates on it, and I'm talking to the front right now. Now I'm talking to the side. And I bet you can barely hear it.
I swear to God, ribbon mics null out to 0, and the dual diaphragm condensers on the side don't quite null out like a ribbon does.
I think it's possible that there is a slight change in that, but I think for the effect of what you're actually looking for in actual real world usage, that null, you're talking from going from like, let's say I'm peaking at -10 to now I'm peaking at -65.
Yeah, it's negligible, but
it's effectively nothing.
Well, the only reason we could hear you just then when you did your side test was the room reverberation itself.
Also that.
We were only hearing your voice bouncing off the wall the mic was pointing at.
But there was no direct. Yeah.
Also, there's a couple other things at play. Because we tune this very carefully so that the backplate voltage is exactly half of the rear diaphragm voltage. Because the front diaphragm's grounded, right? So you were talking about balanced power earlier, and it's kind of the same thing, right? So basically what's happening is the backplate's charged to, let's say, 50 volts to make it easy. The front diaphragm's grounded, so now we have a 50 volt potential between the front diaphragm and the backplate, 50 minus 0. Now, if we put the rear one at 100 volts, it's 50 minus 100, so it's negative 50. Negative 50 potential between the rear diaphragm and the backplate. And so when I talk into the front, it's producing a sine wave. And when I talk into the rear, it's producing a cosine wave. And when you go to the side, then it goes
cancels
to 0.
out. Sine plus cosine is 0.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You remember math class. Not everybody does.
A little bit.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one way to polarize. That's not every capsule polarization scheme. That's the one that we use on all our microphones because I think it's probably the cleverest. But there are other ways to do it. I mean, you could peel this onion down as much as you wanted, and we could get so nerdy here. But I hope your audience isn't bored to death.
Could you do a diaphragm where actually you do a single diaphragm and then you put the charge plate
on the outside?
On the outside, yeah.
Yes, and there are mics that do that. Yeah, there are mics where the diaphragm's in between two charge plates.
But then you're literally singing through those holes, and you get the.
Not necessarily a problem, believe it or not. Yeah, not necessarily a problem. But there are mics where there's a suspended diaphragm between two backplates. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they come with their own sets of problems. I've never designed one. I don't even think I've worked on one, and I'm kind of glad because they're complicated. But never say never.
Let me ask you something about what is important about a mic design. Now, this may seem terribly obvious, but it may not be. What is the most, and like, if you're looking at the main components of a microphone, what influences the sound that the actor, the performer is going to hear the most? Is it the capsule?
The capsule,
is it the electronics, or is it the tube? What is it?
That's the first question I've understood this whole interview.
I think that like tube mics for a long time, everyone's like, ooh, tube mic. And it's like tubes don't make as big of a difference as transformers, I think, and the capsules are a lot of the voicing.
The capsules are 90% of it, honestly. Like the way I look at it, so we use the same capsule in our V13 and our V4. And because of that, you can tell they're siblings, right? It's like when you look at two people and you're like, you definitely came from the same parents. Mm-hmm. The capsule, I think, has such a strong influence on the voicing. Now, there are things you can do in the circuit that change that. The most obvious being actual passive EQ moves, like roll-offs and inductive tertiary loops.
And is that what those mic mod people are doing? Is changing out circuit to try to influence the voicing of the mic in some way? Sometimes
they're replacing the full capsule if it's a crummy capsule. You know, that's the single biggest thing you can do. I liken it to like making a steak, right? Apologies to any vegans or vegetarians in the audience. I don't eat beef anymore myself, so I understand. But if you're making a steak and you start out with like skirt meat, right? You can make a carne asada, but God help you if you're trying to make like a ribeye. You know. Yeah. I mean, you got to get the right cut of meat.
Ben at Bee's Knees kind of explained that to him because, like, long ago I had him take some mics and I gave him some Chinese mics to. I mean, this was when he was starting out. Like, I think at this point, like 15 years ago, and I was like, I want to basically like a nice tube mic out of this Chinese mic. Just change the circuit. And he's like, no, mate. Like, I'm doing the whole mic. Like, the only thing that's going to survive is the body.
Yeah, you basically are just using the chassis, right? And like and Ben winds his own toroidal transformers with glass laminations and all this crazy stuff. I don't get that deep, but he'd probably be, you know, if you really want a super nerd guest, he would put me to shame in terms of my, you know, the capsule design itself. But
so the capsule itself is the number one thing that influences the tone. The next thing down the list would be what?
Transformer, I think.
Oh, I disagree on that actually.
Ooh,
transformer size. Transformer size, yes. Woo-hoo! It's not the size of the transformer; it's how you use it.
Fight.
So, transformer can be, depending on the way it's hit by the amplifying, by the actual active electronics, the tube or the FET, right?
Okay.
I would say that the most important thing after that is what the capsule goes into. And it's an impedance converter, right? Capsule impedance is super crazy high, like giga ohms we're talking, right? So when it hits the FET reduces it to a more manageable impedance, usually in the thousands of ohms, or the tube. And then the transformer does even more so a lot of the time, although not always. It depends on the mic. So what it's hitting next is the JFET or the tube. And I think that probably has the second biggest influence because the signal is unadulterated at that point. Then I'd probably go with any signal path capacitors at a certain level. A lot of cheaper mics are using super cheap signal path capacitors, and they can introduce distortion. And depending on the mic design, I will credit Robert here that the transformer is probably next on that list if the capacitors are already good or if the signal path capacitors don't mean anything to the audio in particular. But you have, at minimum, you have one, which is decoupling the power from the tube to the transformer in like a C12 style.
So for your mic designs, transformers are a part of all your mic designs?
No, this is a transformerless mic, actually.
I was going to say, because there's two mics that I can think of, like the 414 TL2, which was transformerless, I believe. That, I believe, is a standout mic, and whatever they did. And the other AKG mic, which is like, I wish I still had it, got stolen, but I had a 460B with a CK1 capsule.
Okay,
and that's transformerless. And that fucking mic was great. And I don't know what it is about it. It's so not there as a mic. Like, I think the transformerless, I think that's
AKG's style too, is they're very much more on like the flatter, like 451s and 460s were very much like that. Also the 451 TL2, this is from a 451B ULS, and this is from a TL2 that were made at the same time. Oh, I should flip this around. Notice how different those are?
Yeah.
In the middle?
Yeah.
So wait, they were actually using... Which one is the TL2?
This is the TL2.
Okay.
It's a different backplate. It's a different acoustic resistance piece that's more complex, that's actually a lot more like the original CK12.
So and back to the diaphragm being the hinging
back
piece.
To the capsule being the most important thing, because ULSs and TL2s, now the TL2s, there's also other reasons, like you said, there's no transformer, but the capsule is different in a TL2 than it is in a ULS, and most people don't realize that.
I never knew that, actually.
Yeah. Most people don't. This is the Z009 or 0009. This is the Z0005 capsules from AKG, and really the only difference.
Smaller is what is it? Because it looks like there's.
This is just a piece of screen, fine mesh, as the acoustic resistance, and this is an actual resistance network made of brass.
I see.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you do you ever work on microtech Phil? Any of
I
their mics?
haven't yet, actually, believe it or not. RFTs or Microtech FLs. No, I haven't, but I mean, I can. I've done. I have somebody that's supposed to send me a pair of UM70s from Microtech FL. They just haven't.
Yeah.
It's dealing with musicians.
Andrew, what's the one that you have?
yeah.
You have a really good sounding one.
I've got two of them. I've got the M92.1S, which is got the EF86 tube and the M7 capsule. And I've got a M930, which is transformerless, but it was one of the 80 they produced for the 80th anniversary of Neumann.
Oh wow, that's cool.
So the other one is kind of a U67-ish thing, but then it's got the M7 capsule instead of the KK67 capsule.
It was based on the UM57, I think. Was it UM57 that was built back in the late 50s? Probably that's why it was called the 57.
Yeah, the 57 was kind of a transitional model.
Between the 67 and the 8, or between the 47 and the 67?
Maybe.
No, I think it was because
Klaus would know more than I would.
Microtech Gefell had the two Neumann factories. So you had the original Neumann factory left Berlin, went to Gefell during the war. Then George went back to Berlin with Neumann, but they kept, because of the wall, because it was in East Germany, Microtech Gefell, which wasn't called Microtech Gefell back then, it was some other name, but it eventually became Microtech Gefell, was actually still the original Neumann. And they still produced the M7 capsule on the original plant. On the original tooling.
Oh, all the way into like the 50s after the Western.
Also, if you find Telefunken branded U47s and stuff, that's because Telefunken never actually made a mic. AKG and Neumann made all their mics for them.
Yeah.
So, Telefunken, even now to this day, is just a name that's rented and put. I mean, a guy I know just sent me a photo of a Telefunken television.
Yeah.
He sent me a Telefunken TV while he's in Malaysia, and you can get a Telefunken vacuum cleaner or toaster in Israel.
Like Telefunken was kind of like Radio Shack in a way.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But the mics, were built by brilliant people.
I had Radio Shack mics that were made by Shure.
That's not surprising.
The other really interesting thing is like really early microphones were made by Westinghouse.
Yes, well, Westinghouse is one of the first makers of a condenser, along with or was
so
it?
You get a washing machine,
Westinghouse or RCA?
And you get yourself
I believe it was Westinghouse.
It was Westinghouse, it was a giant box.
RCA, there's a national Panasonic, like I said. I didn't know Panasonic made microphones until this guy was like, do you think you can fix this?
When did Sony get into it? Sony was early, but
I don't know, to be honest with you. But they still make some good ones,
Oh, they definitely do.
I think, I think they got into it in the 60s because I saw a really early, pretty shitty looking Sony microphone.
They made some good tube mics. Some of those early Sony tube
the
mics.
C37As are pretty incredible.
And
George, I want to go back to
414 like Sony mic. I think it was a 48, but it was also pretty decent. I forget the.
They had some cool esoteric models. George, I want to go back to your question because I do think there's something important that I want to mention that I forgot about what makes a microphone sound best. This is where it gets more philosophical.
The singer.
Exactly. Yeah. Way to spoil it, Robert.
He loves to do that.
No, it's absolutely the performance. Like as an engineer, I was taught very early on, like mediocre engineering can't ruin a fantastic performance. Like if you listen to the song War, good God, y'all. That tambourine is putting an ice pick through your eardrums on any modern system. And Mazzy Star's Fade Into You is also like super bright and harsh and grimy. And the songs and performances were incredible, and it didn't matter.
It's almost like that engineering becomes part of it. I have a friend from New York, is Jim Reeves. He was doing all these records in New York in the 60s. He gets into the 70s, and modern equipment's coming out, and digital comes out. So I meet him around the late 80s, 90s, and he's talking about digital, and he's like, "Oh, the kids, they want analog." And I'm pretty sure what they're all fascinated with is the sound of a tape deck that hasn't been aligned in 3 weeks.
Yeah. It's possible.
I was going to say this: the singer and the performance is king, obviously.
Yeah.
But I was going to say the mic placement is actually has such
I
an
would
incredible influence.
suggest that has a lot to do with it too.
Like when
Absolutely.
people-
I think for voiceover
gosh.
guys, triply so.
Yeah.
I think with singers, you can get, particularly like on this mic, I can go to a wide cardioid on the V14 and I can get away with a lot of things. But like a lot of you guys use 416s because of the whole Ernie Anderson thing.
Because
and
of the
God forbid
proximity.
you move a centimeter.
41.6. Thank you very much.
I know.
That's right.
41.6
We're
is-
rebranding
41.6,
it,
apologies.
But it's the proximity that it's not just mic placement, but it's mic technique and how to play the mic.
Well, and voiceover guys have to do that so carefully on a 416 that I think they get really good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they can
I
really
actually
suck
like
at it
the-
too. I've heard plenty
Exactly.
of bad
Yeah, totally.
416 mic placement because they
As
put
somebody
the
that's-
thing up here and then sometimes it's pointing down like this off
their
below
chest.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
that sounds terrible. I've seen a guy point the mic up up above his head, like
listening
no,
to his
no,
nose.
no.
Awesome.
Placement
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
extremely on target.
Placement's so important. And I mean, I tell people all the time they put up a mic and they've got the capsule pointing at their nose. I'm like, oh, that's part of why your take sounds nasally. Like
Nasally.
my voice is super
Literally.
nasally by nature.
Scooping out
But
handfuls
if I'm
of 250 to 500 or something like that.
yeah, if I'm doing
To
this,
try and
suddenly
fix
you're
it.
hearing a lot more of my nose as opposed to this, which is my chest and my throat and my.
God
my,
forbid
you know.
you're doing a rap performance and they have their hand like this.
Oh, then they
the
turn it into
microphone.
a.
And
Nightmare.
it makes your mic an omni. Like why is
If
it
you
feeding
go
back?
around the
Because
vents,
you-
yeah.
yeah.
I tell you what's interesting is using this microphone.
What is
Which
that?
is the Austrian Audio CC8. It's a pencil.
Okay,
mic.
yeah.
It's got a CK1
It's-
style capsule in it.
You've got to be really careful with this thing.
The
Because it's very
plosives?
sensitive about, it's all
About
about
where
placement
you are.
everything.
And the
also
capsule's close to
plosives,
the
yeah.
front too, right? It's not
Well, the
it's
capsule's
not
right on the end,
Yeah,
so-
it's not right down in
Yeah.
the barrel like a 41.6 or something. But I had a quick question. I wanted to take you back a couple of minutes ago. You were talking about EQ inside the mic.
Yeah.
When if you're designing a mic then and you're setting up that EQ, are you trying to get rid of nuances you don't want there, or have you got a specific sound for that mic in mind? Is it a combination of both? How do you make decisions on how you're going to EQ?
Or you're just
a
trying to
mic?
flatten the curve out. Is it more like
Not
a
necessarily. A flat curve is not necessarily what you want out of a microphone.
I
Go
wouldn't
look at a
have thought
251 curve.
Yeah.
It is the unflattest thing. They rolled it off at like 300 hertz on the early ones because that transformer was so tiny that they didn't want to saturate it, and low frequencies saturate transformers. So they had this little T14 transformer in there, and they rolled it off artificially on the 251, but it's one of the best vocal mics of all time, and it's not a flat mic at all, right? Like what it's more about, to answer your question, Robbo, is I think that for me, it's more of a flow thing. I will take 4 of a prototype into a studio and put it up against the best mics that they have on a real session. And I will have one component position or one capsule voicing or whatever, just one variable in that slightly different. And then I go, okay, I like this one the best, and here's why I like it the best on this variety of sources. Or maybe it's just a vocal or just drums that day or whatever. But it gives me an idea of where to go next. And it's sort of building the plane as you fly. You start with a good capsule. That's really important. And we've gotten a good capsule, and we're really happy with it. But then from there, you have to make all these micro adjustments. And some of those things are making a 1 or 2% difference. But it's like compound interest, right? If I make 20 changes that make a 2% difference,
It's
I'm
the
much,
1
much better.
dB of EQ when you're mastering, and then you pop the EQ out, and you're like, holy cow! But I only did a bunch of 1 dB changes, and
I did a LinkedIn post on that the other day. A good mix isn't about handfuls of one thing. It's about lots of minute changes. That's
Yeah.
it's
It's subtlety, right?
Yeah, totally.
And some of that is like, for instance, on the V14, we like tube mics because they have total harmonic distortion. If you tune a tube mic like to a perfect bias with a really good tube, a lot of the time it sounds like a FET mic, and that's not what we want out of a tube mic. We want that. We want the thing that's imperfect, right? Like you've heard a
tubes
dry
in
guitar
particular,
signal
it's the
before.
second harmonic distortion that tubes tend to distort at.
Even harmonics, even order harmonics, and that's a really important distinction. You're absolutely right.
So-
Guitarists are really about this.
So when you're
you know?
trying that mic over multiple sources, are you favoring the mic that sounds the best over many different sources in general when you're designing your mics?
I try and favor it that way, yeah, and I end up leaning that way because of being a poor audio engineer and not being able. I was in college in America. I was in enough debt, right? So I had to either pick a $99 mic I had to beat to death in the mix to get any use out of, or spend $5,000, sell a kidney, what have you. And I didn't really, I went with the cheap option, right? And so for me, having a mic that was versatile was really important when I was engineering, and I think that's kind of translated in some ways to the way I design too.
I don't think people realize, but when we started, any large diaphragm mic was like $1,000. You couldn't touch.
Or more, yeah.
And it wasn't until China pops out with, I think Marshall or whoever, like the 979 factory.
797. It's the state-run factory. That's why it's got a number. It's a state factory.
And all of a sudden, they're just banging out these $100 mics that were noisier, but man, they were so like they had all the other characteristics of a large diaphragm mic.
Well, and other people were going like they were coming from an SM58. If you come to it from an SM58 to the shittiest, am I allowed to swear on this?
Yes, all the time.
The shittiest possible, shittiest possible MXL, like early 90s MXL.
It destroys it,
Yeah, that has a fingerprint or whatever on it. It still sounds way better at first because you've got so much more high frequency content, much more transient detail from a dynamic can't do what a condenser does. It's just too much mass.
It was like the Mackie ADAT moment of microphones.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And I mean, I remember people would buy 10 of those mics. They'd pick the one they liked the best because they all sounded remarkably different. They were using a drill press and a template to do the capsule backplates early on. Before they got CNC machining, they were doing it by hand. So they were vastly, and like a fraction of a millimeter makes a huge difference. So they were vastly different.
And for the geeks in the audience, that's the Alesis ADAT, not the Mackie. Just if you're keeping
no. It was the Mackie 8 bus plus the Alesis ADAT all of a sudden gave everybody a 24-track studio.
Exactly, yeah.
It was like, just destroyed the studio market.
Would you like to hear my favorite story about the ADAT from somebody who worked at Alesis at the time?
Oh, yeah.
So they were hyping up the ADAT before NAMM. They were like, this is going to be a big deal. It's going to revolutionize music. It's going to make it more accessible, yada, yada. And at the show, they could not get this machine to work.
Oh, no.
And they were panicking.
Wow.
So what they did is they had them come in and they had a tape machine behind the curtain, rolling tape. And the buttons on the front of the ADAT machine were wired up to the tape machine to make it run.
Oh my God.
Scandalous.
Back then, this is from somebody who worked at AKG, mind you. Like this is a primary source that was there for this. Back then, NAMM was like the way you got gear out, right? This was pre-internet. And they were like, oh God, if this isn't working at the show, like all our work this year has been for nothing. So they made a marketing decision that sounds just like tape. 'Cause it is.
And it did not. But hey, here's a really funny one.
Not even kidding. Isn't that insane?
That is insane. I was at a studio I worked at, had big softeted Genelecs. And they were having a problem with one of the speakers. And so they had the speaker out for like a week, and supposedly they got the speaker back in, but they played this practical joke on me. And so they walk in, they're like, we got the speaker back, but it's not sounding the same. And they had 2 tracks in Pro Tools, one on the left, one on the right, looks like the same audio file. And they're like, look, I play this one and it sounds like this. And I play that one and it sounds like that. And I was like, yeah, that is different. What's going on? And at some point, I go in, I'm like, let me sit at Pro Tools. That can't be. And I start hitting play. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I start to notice that, like, I think Pro Tools is delayed or something. And right at that point, when I'm like, I think there's something wrong with Pro Tools here, the assistant engineer pops out of the soffit.
That's pretty good.
But he was following my playbacks, like, pretty close, because I first didn't catch it. I'd hit play to be like, this is the right mic.
And then he starts singing, never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. Oh, man. What other microphone questions that are more accessible to your audience do you have?
I've got...
Because me and Robert could probably nerd out this entire time.
Nerding out. Yeah, not probably. You are. I just want to step you back to the mic creation thing again, because it's got me fascinated. So, and I'm interested to know then, if you're putting 3 or 4 mics up in a room and listening to each one, are you, as a source for those, when you're listening to them, are you using something that you imagine that mic will be used for? Like, what are you using as a source to listen to make these decisions?
Well, a lot of the times, so like when we're doing development for, days at a time, I'll be in the studio with one guitar and one voice and be working with that. And it's my voice and my guitar. So you can imagine I don't ever release those tracks.
Oh, come on.
But then I take it into studios for real world use. And it's, when I was living in LA, I'd be like, okay, my buddy Caesar is having this big session with this big artist, and I'm just going to take it in and see if I can throw it up on that session on whatever, right? Because he's doing the setup well beforehand. So it might be on the drum overheads that time around, and then it might be guitar amps another time.
So
it's
you're like throwing it around all different places. Really.
Yeah, and that gives you a much better, I think, overall picture of one, what the mic's strengths and weaknesses are. But two, I think it gives you a better overall picture because different piano, even like going between two pianos, you're going to get different harmonic content, right? So like, it's just, to me, getting an overall picture is not just, it's not the person at NAMM leaning in and going 1 2 1 2. Yeah, this sounds really good, or jangling their keys in front of it. Yeah. That means absolutely nothing, right? You have to get, and it's funny now when I hear my mic in a shootout, a lot of the times, even having never heard the instrument on its own, I can pick my mic out of the crowd just because that sonic fingerprint, having listened to thousands of these, has just permanently embedded itself in my auditory cortex, I think, at this point. Yeah. And I can be like, that's probably the V13 out of these 4 mics, and 90% of the time I'm right.
I always think it's like you have to get to know them. And it's like you can't just get to know a mic in one session. You have to play with it and use it in different situations and get a feel for how they react. And it takes time.
I will say this. I know you don't like to compare your mics because they are really their own design and they're unique. But I had a situation where we got to hear it. I got to hear it in context alongside a U67. And
David Kay's place.
David Kay's, yeah. And I have to say the V13 was a hell of a good stand-in when the 67 went out for service. It was
67's a little darker. And the V13 definitely has the top end roll off. I don't like a strident mic. And once again, that's the mic designer's philosophy about sound.
Right.
Like Dave Royer, the Mojave mics he designs are great mics. They're also way too bright for me.
Right.
And people love the Mojaves. That doesn't mean they're bad mics.
Yep.
It just means that Dave has an idea about what audio is that's different than my idea about what good audio is. And that flows, right? That flows into what you're designing inevitably.
Well, that was fun. Is it over?
The Pro Audio Suite, with thanks to Tribooth and Austrian Audio, recorded using Source Connect, edited by Andrew Peters and mixed by Voodoo Radio Imaging, with tech support from George the Tech Whittam. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and join in the conversation on our Facebook group. To leave a comment, suggest a topic, or just say g'day, drop us a note at our website, theproaudiosuite.com.